So we have a tool called the breaking point finder. So the question is, we just ran 400 sessions. Is 400 sessions enough that would have maxed out or broken the server? Well, I don't know, but let's run a test here to see what will break it. So we're going to go at max 1,024 sessions. Just happens to be a power of 2, but it doesn't have to be. Seconds per step is 20, meaning we're going to run each step for 20 seconds. Warm-up time for each step will be 5 seconds, and then the think time will be 2 milliseconds. So we're going to be doubling. We're going to run one session, see what our whole throughput is, 2 sessions, 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on. So then what's going to happen is the query is going to run, and it's going to run one thread for 20 seconds and see what the throughput's going to be. And then it's going to run 2 and see what the throughput is, and 3 and 4 and 5. No, that's wrong. It's going to run 1 and 2 and 4 and 8 and 16, 32 powers of 2 going forward. Here, with one thread, it completed 487 queries with an average of 14 milliseconds. Okay. Now it's running 2 in parallel, and what it's going to do is it's going to compare these. And if you look at the charts down below, the orange is the P95 latency, meaning the first one was 22 seconds or 22 milliseconds, then it jumped to 25. And we should see that jump over time as there's more of them being run in parallel. The blue is the actual throughput of how many were run. And with 4 of them in parallel, it was able to complete 1,521 in the 20-second runtime.
So it's almost doubling how much it can do, but it's dropping off each time by a little bit.
Yes. Until this one, it wasn't almost doubling. It went from 1,500 to 2,000, which isn't even close to double. Interesting. As soon as you said that, Mitch, the pattern changed.
Well, we might be seeing the end of this test pretty soon then.
Yeah. So there's the term the knee is where you get the absolute best performance before it breaks. And that's a load testing term. So what it's showing here is that on this query, it plateaued out at 16 in parallel, and that the throughput, we were getting the absolute best throughput at 8. So that's not really very good overall. So let's go back and see what we can do to fix this query. So back to Management Studio. What we did is we went and looked at the query, examined the plan, and all that kind of stuff, and we came up with this suggested index that be added. This one here. We will add that index. And then what I want to do is I want to run the same breaking point finder again after adding the index and see how it changes. But before we do that, I'm going to save this report to temp directory, and then we're going to run the breaking point finder again.
So one of the settings that I saw on there, it was doubling or fixed. What's going to be the difference between those?
So if you set it to fixed, it would like increase by whatever your fixed value was, like 5 sessions, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. By doubling, you're going powers of 2, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, so on like that. And so you're able to get, I mean, it might be if you were doing a fixed amount that you might run for hours before you found that breaking point. But with a small fixed amount, you're going to be more exact on that breaking point. Whereas if you're doubling, it's just going to give you kind of an overall estimate of where that breaking point is.
Right. So once you get in those higher numbers with a doubling breaking point, it's a rough estimate of how much can be done at that point.
Yep. So what I've done is I've brought over the previous report that I saved as an HTML page, and just to compare them side by side as we're running here. So the previous run, we got to 8. That was the knee. 16 was the plateau, and then it gave up at that point. So we're letting this run. Looking at the throughput, before adding the index, we were getting about 32 queries per second, then 59, then 101, and 136, and so on down there. Well, look at our completed in that, let's see, queries per second. 55, 102, 165, 412. So we're much higher. Now we're up to 780 queries per second, much higher than we saw before. Interesting. Something's jumping around a little bit on latency there. I hope gosh, it's a test server. There could be someone else running something on it too. And that's just a side note. You want to make sure that there's not a lot of other stuff going on in your test server when you do this that could throw off the test. But in that 20-second test, it's showing it completed 11,000. Now it completed 20,000 in that next test. And so the queries per second were at 1,359. And it's continuing to climb here, way better than what we were seeing before. I mean, before the charts peaked at about 147, almost 150. And now we're up at 3,000 per second, queries per second. Way more throughput than we were able to see before. We were able to see that adding that index had enough of an impact on the system or on the query in order to be able to know that it was helping.
So since we built this database, we had the actionable item on what to fix with that specific query. If this was a server where we hadn't built it or not a test database, how would one find those actionable items? If it's an index or some code changes, where can they look for that kind of stuff?
Well, you could use the query performance program here, and we can go look at like long running queries, but high CPU is what I was looking at. And under load test, well, it's not formatted very well here, but if we right clicked and we don't have the execution plan on that one. That's some blocking tests that we've got. Yeah, there's other stuff going on here. So that's where we would go and look at the execution plan. And when this finishes, we'll go take a look at another way to do that. So this time, our knee was at 512 sessions instead of 8. So that's a significant improvement. Our plateau was at 1024. And our max that we were getting throughput was about 14,000 queries per second. Pretty good compared to the 136 queries per second that it maxed out before we added that index. Okay, so let's go back and let's run this load test again. And instead of 400, let's go to 2,000. Whoops, 2,000, because I think that this can be more of a load than what we saw before. I know if we'd done 2,000 with the previous query without the index being added, it would have just peaked out and crashed at that point. But let's see what happens now. So it's a ramp up time of 1 minute. And then after that, it is running for 2 minutes.
It's already above 30,000 queries completed. So that's way better than what we were seeing the first time.
Yeah, for sure. And look at our throughput. Our throughput's up to almost 5,000. And what did we say we saw on the breaking point finder? We saw the throughput was around 14,000. So let's see if we can get above 14,000 with this load test here. This might be throwing more of a load at it than it can handle. And where we would see that if it's throwing too much of a load at it is that we would see the active sessions peak out and then start to drop again.
Another kind of fun one to see is all the P99 and the P50 numbers. Compared to 2.7 seconds, we're looking at 50 milliseconds 99% of the time.
Yeah, 50 milliseconds versus almost three seconds. Yeah. That's a significant increase. So right now, it looks like we're starting to see a peak on the throughput on queries per second. Now, that peak could be just because of how many sessions we have thrown at it now. But yeah, we're somewhere around 8,000, it looks like, per second. And we've got approaching 600,000 queries that have been completed so far on this load test. Oh, something just happened. The throughput just dropped massively. Okay, and it's starting to come back up. So that's one of those things that I don't know what else we've got going on the server. I hope not that much, but we did hit some errors along the way there.
where would you recommend running the load tests from? Would you say right on the SQL Server itself, or where your web host server is, or run the application from, say, your remote desktop somewhere?
Yep. So that's a good question. It really depends on what it is you want to be testing. I mean, right here, I'm running it on my desktop connected to a SQL server that's on the same network in my home office here.
Mm-hmm.
Should be a pretty good network connection, although I am running over Wi-Fi on my laptop running this, so that could impact it. I think that if you really want to test the absolute overall throughput of the SQL server, run this on the SQL server or as close to the SQL server as you can get. And then that will eliminate things like local network traffic or other things like that. If you're trying to simulate what's the maximum load that could be coming from your web server, well, you could run this app on your web server and see how things compare at that point. If you're looking for, well, here's what you shouldn't do. I was working on this remotely and I had a Starlink connection that wasn't in the best overall Starlink speed. Although I love Starlink, it's great speed usually most of the time, but I was in a kind of a slow location at that point in time. And I ran this and the throughput was significantly lower over my VPN going across Starlink than it was being in the same office connected to, or data center connected to the SQL server. So
Right.
don't do it over a slow remote connection because that
So
won't
yeah,
really slam your server.
there's other bottlenecks beyond SQL Server that you just have to be mindful of while running this.
Thanks for watching. I'm Steve, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you like it, please click the thumbs up icon. And if you want to subscribe, click subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon to get notified when we have new videos. All right, have a great day.